I used to believe that the hardest decisions of my life were already behind me, raising a child on my own, keeping our tiny home warm through winters that felt colder than loneliness itself, and working jobs that ate away at my bones but kept food on the table. I thought I had endured enough storms to recognize when peace finally arrived. But life, as always, has its own sense of timing, sometimes cruel, sometimes kind. It was on a mild Sunday morning, as sunlight slipped through my kitchen curtains, that I made the decision that would shake my family to its core. I was getting married again. To be precise, I, Eleanor Harding, 58 years old and a widow for nearly 2 decades, was about to marry a man my son would consider a stranger and far too old to be worthy of me. I sat at the small wooden table with its faded cherry finish, fingers curled around a cup of lukewarm coffee. My heart beat with an odd combination of excitement and dread. For weeks, I had rehearsed how to tell my son, Daniel. I imagined his face softening in surprise, then blooming into joy. I imagined him teasing me gently, hugging me, telling me he was happy I had found companionship again. But imagination is often kinder than reality. Daniel had always been protective of me, sometimes excessively so. Losing his father at the age of 7 had left a mark deep enough for both of us to stumble on even years later. He grew up too fast, took on burdens no child should carry, and even now, at 32, married and stable, he still looked at me as if I were a fragile piece of glass that could crack with the wrong touch. I sighed, sliding the engagement ring off my finger for a moment and placing it on the table. The gold band glimmered faintly, understated yet elegant, just like the man who had given it to me. Walter. The name alone warmed my chest. He was 76, with silver hair he never bothered to comb properly, and eyes so vivid and clear they made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. He had lived a life full of twists and heartaches, had buried a wife he had loved fiercely, and yet he still believed in beginnings. When he held my hands, I felt like life was still wide open. But how would Daniel feel when he learned that his old mother was marrying a man even older? Not well. Not well at all. And his wife, Melissa, beautiful, sharp-tongued, born from a family where appearance mattered more than sincerity, would be worse. She'd laugh behind her perfectly manicured hand, roll her eyes, and whisper about desperation and foolishness. I braced myself. The clock struck noon when I finally drove to Daniel's house. The tidy suburban lawns, the manicured streets, the uniform houses, they were nothing like the neighborhood where he'd grown up. He had worked hard for all of this, and I had always been proud of the life he built. I parked front of his driveway, gripping the steering wheel as if it could steady my heart. Before I had a chance to gather my thoughts, the front door opened and Daniel stepped out, waving. "Mom, you're early. Lunch is almost ready. Melissa made that chicken salad you like." I forced a smile. "Sounds lovely." Melissa appeared behind him, wearing an expression that hovered between politeness and impatience. Her blonde hair was pulled into a sleek bun, her blouse immaculate. "Eleanor," she greeted me with a nod, "come in. The house is a mess, so don't mind it." The house wasn't a mess. It never was. Her insistence on perfection bordered on obsession. As I stepped inside, Daniel took my coat and hung it neatly before guiding me to the table. We exchanged small talk, light and inconsequential, but my heart hammered with every passing second. Finally, when the plates were cleared away and Melissa poured tea for each of us, I decided it was now or never. "I have some news," I said, the words trembling like newborn wings. Daniel looked up, instantly concerned. "Is everything okay? Is it your health?" No, I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." Melissa raised an eyebrow. "So what's the news?" I inhaled deeply. "I'm getting married." Silence fell so abruptly that even the ticking of the wall clock seemed to pause. Daniel blinked several times. "Married? To whom?" "A wonderful man," I said softly. "His name is Walter." A beat. Then, "Who?" Daniel's voice sharpened. "You've never met him," I admitted. "We met at the community center months ago." Melissa exchanged a look with Daniel, one that irked me immediately, a look dripping with judgment. Daniel frowned. "Mom, why didn't you tell me you were seeing someone?" I wanted to be sure before I said anything, and I am sure, very sure. How old is he? Melissa asked, bluntly, swirling her tea but not drinking it. 76. Melissa sputtered. You're marrying a 76-year-old? Daniel's jaw tightened. Mom, that's too old. He's not too old for me, I said firmly, feeling the first sting of anger. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I'm trying to understand this, really, but you hardly know him, and he's elderly. What are you thinking? Melissa added, This feels reckless, and honestly, a little pathetic. The words sliced deeper than I expected. I straightened, lifting my chin. I didn't come here for your approval. I came to share my happiness. Daniel sighed, rubbing his forehead. Mom, please don't be naive. Older men can have motives. Motives? I repeated, incredulous. You think he's using me? For what? My vast fortune? That's not what I said, muttered Daniel. Oh, come on. What if he's lonely, or confused, or worse, what if he's after your assets? I stared at both of them, feeling a strange mixture of heartbreak and fury swell inside me. You're talking about a man you've never even met, a man who has shown me nothing but kindness. Daniel exhaled heavily. Mom, I don't like this. I think you're making a mistake. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Well, you're going to meet him next week, both of you. Melissa scoffed softly. I can't wait. Her tone said the opposite. As I stood to leave, a cold ache filled my chest. This was supposed to be a joyful moment. Instead, their doubt clung to me like frost. But what none of us knew, not me, not Daniel, not Melissa, was that the truth about the man they mocked for being old would soon stun them all, in ways they could never imagine. I spent the next week wrestling with doubts, not about Walter, never about Walter, but about the storm that awaited us when he met my son and daughter-in-law. I could already imagine Melissa's pinched expression, Daniel's stiff posture, the silent calculations behind their eyes as they judged him by the grooves on his face or the years he carried. They would see an old man. They wouldn't see the strength beneath the age. They wouldn't see the fire that still lived behind his calm smile. But they would. One way or another, they would. The morning of the dinner, I arrived at Walter's home early. He lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind with towering oak trees and houses modest in size, but rich in memories. When I rang his doorbell, he greeted me with that familiar, slightly lopsided smile that had slowly become my anchor. Well, he said, stepping aside to let me in, you look like you've swallowed a thunderstorm. I laughed nervously, just a little anxious. He cupped my cheek gently. They'll come around. I sighed. You haven't met them yet. I've met plenty of difficult people in my 76 years, he chuckled. I'm still here, aren't I? That's what worries me, I joked weakly. He shook his head and walked to the dining table where he had laid out a simple yet elegant dinner, roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, grilled vegetables, and a bottle of wine older than both Daniel's marriage and Melissa's understanding of humility. Walter, I gasped, you didn't have to go through all this trouble. First impressions matter, he said with a wink, and besides, I want your son to see that I'm not trying to take anything from you, except maybe your peace and quiet. I chuckled. You already did that when you proposed. Good, he said, kissing the top of my hand, because I plan to keep you busy for as long as I've got breath. My heart swelled in my chest. This tenderness, this humor, this warmth, this was what Daniel and Melissa didn't understand. They saw numbers. Walter gave me life again. When the doorbell rang at 6:01 p.m., I nearly jumped. Walter touched my shoulder reassuringly. Let's greet them together. I nodded, inhaling deeply. Daniel stood on the porch in a crisp button-down shirt, Melissa beside him in an outfit that probably cost more than my entire grocery bill for the month. Both wore polite smiles that felt as real as plastic flowers. Mom, Daniel said, leaning in for a brief hug that felt more like an obligation. Good to see you.
Melissa held out a bottle of wine. "We brought this." Walter accepted it with a gracious smile. "Thank you. Come in, both of you. I'm Walter." Daniel's eyes took him in, head to toe, assessing, judging, deciding. Melissa's brows rose almost imperceptibly, as if she had expected a corpse instead of a man. Walter, unfazed, stepped back and gestured them inside. "Please, make yourselves comfortable." Daniel nodded stiffly. "Thank you. This is, a nice place." "It's home," Walter said simply. During dinner, the tension hung like a fog no candle could burn away. Walter tried to guide the evening with gentle conversation. "So, Daniel," he began with genuine interest, "your mother tells me you're in finance?" "Yes," Daniel replied. "I manage corporate portfolios." "A demanding field," Walter said thoughtfully. "I admire that." Daniel seemed thrown off by the sincerity. "Thank you. And you? Mom didn't tell us much about your background." This was what I feared. Walter, of course, noticed the layers beneath the question. He smiled faintly. "I've had a long life with many chapters. Retired now, of course." Melissa sipped her wine. "But what did you do before retiring?" "I worked in several fields," Walter answered calmly. "Some administrative roles, some management. The titles aren't as important as the work I tried to do." Melissa smirked slightly. "So you don't have a specific career?" I felt heat rise in my chest, but Walter remained serene. "Life doesn't always fit into neat categories," he said with a patient smile. "I learned early on that what you accomplish isn't half as important as who you become." Melissa leaned back. "That's vague." Daniel wiped his mouth with his napkin. "Mom, can we talk privately for a moment?" Walter immediately stood. "Of course, take your time." He disappeared into the kitchen, giving us space. Daniel turned to me, voice low and firm. "Mom, what exactly do you know about this man? He seems nice enough, but there's something off." "Off?" I echoed, stunned. Melissa folded her arms. "He dodged half the questions we asked. That's suspicious." "He didn't dodge anything," I snapped quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mom, he's older, a lot older, and you barely know him." I felt something crack inside me. I know him better than I know most people. Daniel leaned in. "Be honest, are you marrying him because you're lonely?" Melissa added, "Or because you're afraid of growing old alone?" My throat tightened. I stood, trembling but resolute. "I'm marrying him because he loves me, because he treats me with respect, something you two haven't shown him tonight." Daniel looked away. Melissa pursed her lips. Before I could continue, Walter re-entered the room, carrying dessert, homemade apple crumble, warm and fragrant. But he had heard enough. The flicker in his eyes told me so. He set the dish down gently. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "it's time I tell you who I really am." Daniel and Melissa looked up, curious and wary. Walter's voice was calm, but something powerful stirred beneath it. "There are things about my past," he said, "that your mother knows, but you don't. And once you learn them, I believe you'll understand why age is the least important thing about me." He looked directly at Daniel. "Because, son, nothing about my life is what it appears."
Walter stood there, steady, calm, unshaken. Yet the room felt charged, as though the air itself leaned in to listen. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Melissa blinked rapidly, her confidence faltering just a little. I held my breath, because although I knew some of Walter's truth, even I didn't know everything. He had always said, "One day, when it matters, I'll tell the story properly." Apparently, today was that day. Walter folded his hands on the table, his posture dignified without being intimidating. "I want to clear the air," he began, "for your sake, for your mother's sake, and for the sake of the life we hope to build. And I'll be honest with you, brutally honest." Daniel swallowed. "Okay." Walter nodded slowly. What I did for a living wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't something I discussed lightly. I've lived several lives in one lifetime, and most of the details were never meant for casual conversations. Melissa raised an eyebrow. That sounds dramatic. Walter smiled faintly. It's not meant to be, it's just the truth. He let a long silence settle before speaking again. I spent 36 years working for the military, not as a soldier, though I served briefly, but as a field interpreter and intelligence liaison. Daniel blinked. I'm sorry, what? I worked, Walter said carefully, with teams stationed in high-conflict regions. My job was communication, translating, negotiating, de-escalating. But as time passed, the role expanded. I became involved in tracking extremist networks, helping extract civilians, and, on several occasions, assisting in covert operations. Melissa's jaw actually dropped. You're joking. No, Walter replied gently. I don't joke about things that cost lives. A chill slid through me. I had known he had worked abroad, that he had lost friends, that the world he came from was darker and sharper than the quiet life he lived now. But hearing it spoken aloud, to my son, to his skeptical wife, felt like uncovering a part of him still wrapped in smoke and danger. Daniel looked stunned. But you seem so old, Walter offered with a soft chuckle. Daniel flushed. I didn't mean... It's all right, Walter said. Age catches all of us, but don't mistake wrinkles for weakness. I've survived things many people wouldn't dare to imagine. Melissa leaned forward, eyes narrowing. If you had such an important career, why are you living so simply? Walter tilted his head. Because simplicity is peace. After what I've seen, peace is priceless. She opened her mouth again, but Walter continued before she could challenge him. I retired early because I was injured during an extraction mission. Nothing too dramatic, just a spinal injury that still bothers me on cold days. They offered a higher position afterward, but I had lost too many colleagues by then. I needed a life that didn't require me to sleep with one eye open. Daniel stared at him. Why didn't you tell us any of this earlier? Because, Walter said kindly, sharing my past isn't a right, it's a privilege, and I wasn't sure you'd earned that privilege yet. Melissa bristled. Excuse me? Walter regarded her with a calm, almost grandfatherly patience. I don't say that to insult you, but you judged me before you even walked through the door. You assumed the worst. That tells me you weren't ready to hear who I really am. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again, guilt flickering in his eyes. Walter continued softly, You see an old man, but I've survived ambushes, evacuations, betrayals, and loss. I've held dying soldiers in my arms. I've rescued children who didn't speak a word of my language, but clung to me like I was the only safe place left in the world. His voice trembled, not from weakness, but from memory. I've also lost my wife, he added gently, eyes dropping. She was the bravest woman I ever knew, a nurse who served in crisis zones. We shared the same purpose, and we paid the same price. My heart squeezed painfully. He had told me this before, but not with this level of detail, not with this rawness. Daniel leaned forward, softer now. Walter, I'm sorry, I didn't know. No, you didn't, Walter said, and I don't blame you. Most people don't look past the surface, but your mother did. He turned his gaze to me then, tender, warm. She saw a man who bruised but didn't break, who lost nearly everything and still believed life had room for love. I felt tears gather beside myself. Daniel looked between us, something shifting in his expression. Melissa, however, crossed her arms. Even if all of this is true, and I'm not saying it isn't, it doesn't explain why you're marrying someone 20 years younger. Walter met her eyes steadily. Because age is not a barrier to companionship. Your mother and I connect, we understand each other, and we want the same things, a quiet life filled with kindness. But she could end up caring for you, bluntly she said, as you decline.
Just as I could end up caring for her, Walter replied calmly. No one knows what tomorrow brings. I could live 10 more years, or 20 more years, or I could pass before her. Life isn't measured in predictions, it's measured in choices. Daniel exhaled slowly. You're not what I expected. I know, Walter replied gently, but I'm not asking for your permission. I'm asking for your willingness to try. Your mother deserves happiness. If I can provide that, even for a few years, then my life will have one more purpose. Silence settled again, heavy, thoughtful. Melissa stared at the table. Daniel rubbed his temples, processing everything. Finally, Daniel looked at me. Mom, I think I owe you an apology. I swallowed, voice soft. I didn't want to hide anything. I just wanted you to meet him before judging him. Daniel nodded slowly. You were right. Melissa said nothing, but her silence wasn't confident anymore. It wavered, unsure. Walter stood then, giving them both a small smile. I know tonight was difficult, but I'm grateful you came. I don't need your approval, just your understanding. He glanced at me again, eyes glowing with quiet strength. And in time, he added, I hope you'll come to see me more than the number of years I carry. By the time dessert plates were empty, the room felt different, not healed, not whole, but shifted. The first crack in their prejudice had formed. But the real revelation, the one that would shake them to their core, was still waiting. For Walter had not yet revealed the whole truth, and when he did, it would stun everyone, including me.
After Daniel and Melissa left, the house felt unusually quiet. Not empty. Walter had a way of filling silence with comfort, but quiet in a way that made me reflect on every word spoken. The evening had gone better than I feared, yet worse than I hoped. Daniel was shaken, Melissa was unconvinced, and Walter was calm as always, but I could see the exhaustion behind his eyes. He poured us both some tea and handed me a cup. You're thinking too much again, he said softly, sitting beside me on the couch. I always think too much, I sighed, leaning into him. Tonight was difficult. Important things often are. I looked at him. Did you mean to tell them all that tonight? Walter hesitated. I meant to tell them something, just maybe not so much so soon. I touched his hand. I didn't know about the children you rescued. You never mentioned that. He smiled faintly. Some memories take time to come out of the dark. Some never do. I cupped his cheek. I'm proud of you. He kissed my forehead. And I'm grateful for you. But even as he held me, a small, strange flicker of worry tugged at my ribs. Because when he said, some memories never do, something behind his eyes shuddered, like he was hiding a deeper truth, something even I wasn't ready to hear. The next day, Daniel called me. Mom, he began, awkwardly, do you have time for lunch? I smiled into the phone. Always. We met at a small cafe he used to love as a teenager. He picked at his food, stirring the soup without bringing the spoon to his mouth. I let him take his time. Daniel was never good at expressing emotions, especially when guilt was involved. Finally, he exhaled sharply. I was out of line last night. I sipped my tea. You were concerned, I understand. No, he shook his head. I didn't even give him a chance. I just assumed the worst. His voice cracked just slightly, enough for me to soften. Losing Dad made you protective, I said gently, and I know you're afraid I'll be hurt. I am, he admitted, eyes downcast. But Walter, he's not what I expected, and I didn't realize he, went through all that. He paused. But Mom, you know Melissa. She still has doubts. I expected that. Daniel leaned in. She thinks Walter might be overplaying parts of his story. My jaw tightened. Daniel? I'm not saying I think that, he interrupted. I'm just telling you what she said. I rubbed my forehead. Your wife grew up in a world where everything's polished and calculated. She doesn't understand people who've lived difficult lives. She wants to protect us financially, Daniel offered weakly. I'm not asking you or her for anything. He looked away. She just worries.
I stared at him for a long moment. "Do you worry that he's not being completely honest?" Daniel flinched. "Mom, I don't know him, and if there's more to the story, I guess I'd rather know now." My heart tightened. He had a point. Walter had spoken much, but hinted at more. "I'll talk to him," I said softly, not because I doubt him, but because I want transparency. Daniel nodded slowly. "I'm trying, Mom. I really am." "I know," I whispered. We left with a tentative peace between us, fragile but real. That evening, I visited Walter again. He was in his small garden, pruning a rose bush with such care it was as if the plant might feel pain. He looked up when he heard the gate, his smile warm but weary. "You look thoughtful," he said. "I met with Daniel today." "I figured." I joined him, leaning on the railing. "He's trying to understand you." Walter chuckled. "Most people spend their whole lives trying to understand themselves. Expecting others to do it is asking too much." I placed a hand over his. "Walter, did you tell my son everything? Everything that matters?" His hands stilled. The silence lasted a second too long. "Eleanor," he said slowly, "there are pieces of my past that are, well, complicated. I'm not asking for classified details, just honesty." He set down the pruning shears. "I have been honest, but honesty doesn't mean completeness. Some stories are heavy, some involve others' pain, not just my own." "Does it affect us?" I whispered. He looked at me with tired eyes. "No, not in the way you fear." "Then what way?" Another silence, a longer one. Finally, he spoke. "There were missions that changed me, decisions I made that haunt me, and consequences that followed me long after retirement." I swallowed. "Consequences?" "Nothing illegal," he reassured quickly, "but moral weight can be heavier than any criminal charge." I reached for his hand. "Whatever it is, we can face it." He looked at me with gratitude so deep it made my chest ache. "You're braver than you think." I smiled weakly. "I'm learning from you." But the conversation left a hollow space inside me. Not fear, just uncertainty. Something was still unsaid. Something important. 2 days later, Melissa called me. Not Daniel. Melissa. "Eleanor," she said, sugarcoating her tone. "I was hoping we could talk." My stomach tightened. "Of course." "Great," she said brightly. "I'd like to visit, today, if possible." My pulse kicked. Melissa never came over alone. Ever. "Of course," I repeated, though dread settled in my bones. She arrived within an hour, stepping into my house as if entering a showroom she intended to critique. She sat on the couch, crossed one leg over the other, and placed her designer purse beside her. "I want to be honest," she began. "I'm still not convinced about Walter." I took a slow breath. "Melissa, I've been doing some research." My stomach dropped. "What kind of research?" She leaned forward, eyes gleaming with the thrill of discovery. "I found something," she said softly. "Something you should see." My heart pounded. "Melissa, what did you find?" She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, scrolled, then turned the screen toward me. My breath caught in my throat, because staring back at me was a photo of Walter, but not like I had ever seen him. Younger, harder, standing beside a group of men in tactical gear, holding a weapon, eyes sharp and cold. And beneath the photo, a headline, a name I didn't recognize, a story I wasn't ready to hear. Melissa watched my reaction with grim satisfaction. "Eleanor," she whispered, "who exactly did you agree to marry?"
My pulse thudded in my ears as I stared at the screen. The photograph didn't seem real, at least not connected to the gentleman who tended roses and brewed chamomile tea. This Walter was younger, broader in the shoulders, eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. His jaw was clenched, his uniform dusty, and he held a rifle like it was an extension of his own arm. But it wasn't the image that made the ground shift beneath me. It was the name under it. Walter Hawthorne Clark, former Special Operations Intelligence Officer linked to covert civilian extractions in war zones. There were smaller headlines too. Unconfirmed reports of high-risk missions, survivor of the 1998 Gardesh incident, known for disobeying direct orders to save civilians. My mouth went dry. Where did you find this? Melissa sat back, triumphant. Deeper than page 1 of Google. The surface doesn't show much, but old archives, interviews from former servicemen, some online forums, he's more than he told you. I tore my gaze from the screen. Melissa, this doesn't prove anything bad. Eleanor, she said firmly, he lied. He never lied. He never told me his last name wasn't just Clark. Melissa raised an eyebrow. He left out details that matter. Big ones. I set the phone on the table, hands trembling. Why are you doing this? Because I care about Daniel, she said simply, and even if you don't want to admit it, you're vulnerable. Men like this, men with complicated pasts, don't just retire and bake pies. I rubbed my temples. He's 76. He's a retired man who volunteers, who used to run missions in conflict zones, she interrupted. And look at the caption, disobeyed direct orders. That's not exactly reassuring. My voice rose. He disobeyed orders to save civilians. How is that not admirable? Melissa blinked, caught off guard for a moment, then pressed on. Eleanor, people don't go into that line of work without getting scars, psychological ones. What if he's hiding something more dangerous? What if he has enemies? A cold chill slid down my spine. Enemies? Melissa, I said slowly, you're jumping to conclusions. Melissa crossed her arms. You need to confront him. And what? I snapped. Interrogate him like he's a criminal? If the shoe fits, she murmured. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Get out, I whispered. Melissa blinked. What? Get out. She scoffed, grabbing her bag, but couldn't resist a parting blow. Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. The door clicked shut behind her, and silence crashed over the room. My heart pounded in a chaotic rhythm. Shock, anger, fear, confusion. The photo burned in my mind. The steely expression, the tactical gear, the man he used to be. But something else stuck too. Known for disobeying direct orders to save civilians. That didn't sound like a dangerous man. That sounded like a hero. I drove to Walter's house without calling first. My hands shook on the steering wheel, my breath uneven. When I pulled into his driveway, he was sitting on the porch polishing an old wooden bird feeder. He looked up with concern immediately. Eleanor, you look pale. Come inside. Walter, I said, unable to hide the tremor in my voice. We need to talk. He froze, subtle but unmistakable. Not guilty, not alarmed, just tired. He guided me into the living room and closed the door gently behind us. Tell me what happened. I pulled the phone from my purse, opened the picture Melissa had shown me, and handed it to him. Walter stared at the image for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he set the phone down carefully. I was wondering when someone would find that, he said quietly. I sank onto the couch. Where did you find this? He sat beside me, facing forward instead of looking at me. Because you look at me with kindness, he whispered, with gentleness, with love, and I didn't want you to see the ghosts I carry. I reached for his hand, squeezing hard. Walter, I don't care about your past. I care about you. He turned toward me then, eyes shining with vulnerability I'd never seen from him before. There's more, he said quietly. Not terrible, not dangerous, just painful. But I wasn't ready to tell you, not yet. My heart pounded. Walter, whatever it is, I'm here. He brushed a tear from my cheek with his thumb. You shouldn't have been shown that photo like this, not by someone who wanted to scare you. I shook my head. I'm not scared of you. I know, he murmured, but you're scared for me, and that's worse. Before I could speak, he pulled me into his arms. I felt the strength in him, the steadiness, the ache, the history.
This man was not a danger. He was a survivor, a protector, a man who had given more than he had ever taken. But Melissa's words still haunted the edges of my mind. What if he has enemies? Walter, he pulled away slightly and looked into my eyes. Eleanor, I promise you this. Nothing from my past will harm you. Nothing. I believed him, but belief didn't erase the fear that had crept into me, because if Walter's life had been more dangerous than he admitted, what else lay in the shadows of his story? And why did he still look like a man waiting for something or someone to catch up to him?
The following week crawled by with an uneasy quiet. It was the kind of silence that doesn't calm. It hums, it lingers, it warns. Walter and I still saw each other, still held hands, still shared warm dinners and soft conversations, but something new had settled between us. Not distance, not distrust, just a heavy awareness, a truth waiting to arrive. Daniel called me 3 times that week. Melissa didn't call at all. "Mom," Daniel said during our last conversation, "I know Melissa overstepped. I know she shouldn't have dug like that, but I think you should ask Walter about everything, all of it." I sighed. He's telling me what he can. But is that enough? He had no idea how complicated that question was. On Friday evening, I found Walter standing in his backyard, staring at the horizon. The sky was bruised purple with sunset, painting his silhouette in melancholy. He didn't turn when he heard me step onto the patio. "I thought you wouldn't come today," he said softly. "I always come." He nodded, hands clasped behind his back. "Good." I moved closer, standing beside him. "You're thinking again." "I do that a lot," he murmured. "So do I admitted. We stood in silence for a while until Walter finally exhaled, long and tired. "I didn't sleep much this week." "Because of what Melissa found?" "Partly, mostly because I knew it would lead to questions." I swallowed. "Walter, I don't want to pressure you, but I don't want secrets between us either." "I know," he rubbed his forehead, "and you deserve honesty. You always have." He turned to me, his eyes gentler than the dusk surrounding us. "There is one more part of my past you don't know, something I've carried for nearly 40 years. I held my breath. "A promise," he continued, "one I made to a woman before my first wife, a promise that changed the course of my life." My pulse quickened. "A woman before Margaret?" Walter nodded. "I was married once before her. Briefly." My mouth opened, but no words came out. He continued, voice low. "Her name was Leela. We married young, foolishly young. We were 20. She followed me during my early service years. We thought we were invincible." "What happened?" I whispered. His jaw tightened. "She died during an evacuation in 74, caught in crossfire. I held her in my arms while she took her last breath." Tears pricked my eyes. "Walter!" "I made her a promise," he said, staring into the distance. "Her last words were, 'Save them.' She meant the villagers trapped nearby, civilians, children. I tried, God, I tried, but I couldn't save everyone." He paused, voice thick. "That's why I disobeyed orders in Gardesh, why I sacrificed my own career, because I swore to Leela that I would save as many as I could, no matter what it cost." I felt my hand rise to my chest, trembling. "So when people say I broke orders, they don't know the truth. I wasn't rebelling. I was keeping the last promise my wife ever asked of me." My tears slipped silently down my cheeks. He finally looked at me. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to look at me with pity, or worse, with fear. People who lose that much, they can become hard, cold, ruthless. But I didn't. I couldn't. I wanted to live with compassion because she believed in compassion." I took his hand, gripping tightly. "Walter, thank you for telling me that. Thank you for trusting me with that." He gave me a small, sad smile. "Part of me feared you'd leave.
that the weight of my past would be too much. I'm not going anywhere. His relief was visible, quiet, deep, unfolding in the way his shoulders dropped slightly. I don't have enemies, he said firmly. Not anymore. The world moved on, and so did I. But the memories stay. I just didn't want them to burden you. They don't, I whispered. They make me understand you more. He squeezed my hands. You're remarkable, Eleanor. You are too, I said softly. Then, gently, he added, there's one thing I do fear. Blink? What? Your son, he said, with a wry smile. He may never forgive me for having such a complicated past. I laughed through my tears. Daniel will come around. He loves you, Walter said simply. He's just afraid. I know. Walter brushed a thumb along my cheek. I'm not a danger to your family. I know that. He hesitated. But there is something I haven't told Daniel, something I think he should know eventually. What? Walter inhaled deeply. My pension is substantial, very substantial. Special operations pensions, hazard compensations, survivor benefits from my first wife and from Margaret. His eyes flickered with guilt. If you and I marry, you would inherit everything. I froze. Walter continued quietly. And I won't have you touching a cent of it unless your son understands that it's not a burden, but a gift. My heart began to race. Walter, that's not... It is, he said softly, and I don't want your son assuming I'm taking advantage of you, when in truth, my financial situation dwarfs anything your family has. I stared at him. Then I laughed, out of shock, disbelief, and sudden clarity. That's what you were afraid to tell me? I asked. He smiled sheepishly. It complicates family dynamics. I shook my head, tears of relief slipping free. Walter, Daniel and Melissa thought you were after my assets. His laugh boomed warm into the twilight. Well, that's ironic. We both laughed then, finally, freely. But even as laughter faded, a new question formed in my mind, unspoken. If Melissa learns this truth, what will she do with it?
The next morning, I woke with a strange, unfamiliar feeling in my chest. Not dread, not worry, something quieter, something patient. I realized as sunlight crept across my bedroom floor that it was acceptance. Walter had told me everything, and I believed him. But now came the hardest part, bringing my own family into the truth. Daniel called before I finished breakfast. His voice was stiff, formal, as if he'd been rehearsing. Mom, we need to talk. Can you come by this afternoon? A familiar exhaustion washed over me. Daniel, can't we? Mom, he cut in, please. The word please was small, strained, and somewhere inside me, hope cracked open a little. All right, I said. I'll be there at 3. Melissa was the one who opened the door when I arrived. She flashed a tight smile, not cold, but not warm either. Her eyes darted behind me as though checking to see if Walter had followed. Come in, she said. Inside, Daniel was pacing. His anxiety filled the room like thick fog. I sensed that this wasn't going to be another round of accusations. This was something else, something heavier. Mom, Daniel began, stopping in front of me. I owe you an apology. My breath caught. He ran a hand through his hair, looking younger than he had in years. I judged Walter without giving him a chance. I let Melissa's worries become my own. I didn't trust you, and I should have. Melissa stiffened beside him, but she didn't interrupt. I nodded. Thank you, Daniel. That means more than you know. He exhaled shakily, relief loosening his shoulders. But I need to ask about the report Melissa found. It wasn't easy to read. It made Walter look dangerous. Because he was dangerous, but not in the way you think. Melissa's eyebrows shot up. So you admit? I admit,
come by calmly, that Walter was a man who made hard choices to save lives, and I know the truth because he trusted me with it. Daniel swallowed. What truth? I took a deep breath. He disobeyed orders because he was trying to protect civilians, and he lost someone he loved along the way. The room fell into a weighted silence. Melissa folded her arms, less defensive now and more contemplative. And the other thing, I continued softly, that you both should know, Walter isn't after my assets. He's financially secure, more than secure. Melissa's head snapped up. What? Daniel blinked. What does that mean? It means, I said carefully, that Walter's pension and benefits are substantial. If anything, being with him would make me financially safer than I've ever been. Melissa's lips parted, shock flickering across her face. Daniel looked stunned. You're kidding, he murmured. I'm not. Melissa's cheeks flushed, anger, embarrassment, confusion blending together. Then why the secrecy? Why didn't he tell anyone? Because not everyone reacts well to truth, and he didn't want money to poison his relationships. Daniel sank onto the couch, rubbing his temples. I can't believe this. I can, Melissa said quietly. We both turned to her. She looked smaller, unsure, vulnerable in a way I had rarely seen. When my dad remarried, his new wife drained his retirement, manipulated him, isolated him. It took us years to untangle the mess. I guess, she looked up at me, I guess I projected that fear onto you, onto Walter. My heart softened. Melissa. I was terrified, she whispered. Terrified you were walking into the same trap my dad did. I didn't want to watch it happen again. For the first time in months, I saw her clearly, not as an adversary, but as a woman traumatized by someone else's greed. I get it, I said gently. Your fear came from love. Melissa's eyes glistened. But I still hurt you. I still crossed lines. Yes, I said honestly, but you're trying to fix it now. She nodded slowly. Daniel reached for her hand. She took it, grateful. So what happens now? He asked quietly. Now, I said, you meet him, truly meet him, not with suspicion, not with fear, with honesty. Daniel hesitated. Do you really want us to? Yes, I said, smiling softly, because he wants to meet you. He's not trying to replace your father. He just wants to be part of my life, and that means being respectful of my family. Melissa let out a long breath. Okay, we'll meet him. Daniel nodded. We will. And with an open mind, I added. He gave me a sheepish smile. I promise. Walter was sitting on his porch when I returned that evening. His newspaper lay unopened on his lap. He looked up as I approached. How did it go? He asked. I sat beside him, letting my hand brush his. Better than expected. They want to meet you. His eyebrows lifted. They do? Yes. Walter leaned back, silent for a moment as he processed that. Relief washed slowly, carefully across his features. I'm glad, he finally said. I know they love you fiercely, and I know that loving you means they'll want to protect you. I nodded. And you? Are you nervous? He chuckled. Terrified. I rested my head on his shoulder. It'll go fine. He kissed the top of my hair. As long as you're beside me. I'm not going anywhere. We watched the sunset, soft gold fading into deep amber, and for the first time, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt possible. But even as peace settled in, a new realization emerged quietly in my mind, like a fate warning bell. If truth can heal, it can also expose, and I had a feeling that the next chapter of our lives would reveal even more than any of us were prepared for.
The dinner was set for Saturday at 6. Walter wanted something simple. Daniel wanted something formal. Melissa wanted something controlled. And I, caught between all three, wanted something peaceful. In the end, Walter insisted on cooking himself. "It's just dinner," he'd said. "Not a board meeting, not an interrogation." But the truth was, he was nervous. It showed in the way he rechecked the oven temperature 3 times, wiped the counter even when it was spotless, and lingered a little too long in front of the mirror before deciding which shirt made him look less like a retired fossil. I wrapped my arms around him from behind. "I look perfect," I murmured. He smiled, though I could see the tension in his eyes. "I just want them to see me as I am, not as whatever their imaginations have invented." "They will," I said, kissing his shoulder. "Tonight will be a new start." I believed it, or at least I wanted to. Daniel and Melissa arrived precisely at 6. Walter opened the door before I could stand, and for a moment everyone froze, awkward, uncertain, polite in that fragile way strangers are before they choose whether to trust or retreat. Walter extended a hand. "Daniel, Melissa, I'm glad you came." Daniel accepted his handshake. Melissa followed, a bit stiff but determined. Walter ushered them inside with a gracious smile. "Dinner's nearly ready. I hope you like salmon." "Smells great," Daniel said, and he meant it. Melissa nodded. "It does." We gathered around the table, candles flickering softly. Walter had set everything beautifully. White plates, fresh flowers, warm bread. If he was trying to make a good impression, he succeeded. But beneath the surface of polite conversation, tension flowed like an undercurrent, waiting to pull us under. "So, Walter," Daniel began after a few minutes, "my mom told us some of your story." Walter paused his cutting motions. "I see. I just want to say I didn't understand before, and I'm sorry for judging too quickly." Walter gave a gentle nod. "Thank you, Daniel. That means more than you might think." "And I'm sorry as well," Melissa added hesitantly. "I was scared." Walter looked at her with surprising warmth. "Fear makes us human. You were protecting your family. I respect that." It was the exact right thing to say. Melissa's shoulders softened for the first time all evening. Dinner continued more comfortably after that. The conversation grew lighter, even warm at times. Daniel asked about Walter's garden. Melissa complimented the meal. Walter told a short, gentle story about a dog he once rescued overseas. But then, as the plates were being cleared and dessert was brought out, Melissa asked the question I'd been praying she wouldn't. "So, you've had an interesting life, but why disappear after retirement? Why keep such a low profile for decades?" Walter froze. Subtle, but unmistakable. I shot Melissa a look, but she seemed unaware of her misstep. Walter inhaled slowly. "Some of us don't retire into quiet. Some of us retire into ghosts." Melissa blinked. "Ghosts?" Walter set the dessert tray down with careful precision. "My rank never mattered. My medals never mattered. But my history, it follows me. It always has." Daniel leaned in. "What do you mean?" Walter sighed. "After Lila died, and after Margaret passed later in life, I realized something. I had spent my entire adult life in service of others, sometimes willingly, sometimes painfully, but always at a cost." He looked between them. "I wanted one part of my life to be mine, unobserved, unexamined." Melissa shifted in her seat. I get that, but she didn't. Not fully." Walter gave a sad smile. "The truth is, my disappearance wasn't as dramatic as it sounds. I bought a quiet property, I volunteered, I traveled, I healed, but I stayed out of the public eye because I was tired of being an asset, a soldier, a resource. I wanted to be a man." Daniel's expression softened. "You deserve that." "Yes," Walter said quietly, "and I thought I had found peace." His gaze flickered briefly to me. "And then, your mother appeared in my orbit, and suddenly I was learning how to be a person again. Not a soldier, not a widower, not a ghost. Just a man who wanted to hold her hand." The room held its breath. Melissa whispered, "I didn't mean to pry into something painful." "I know.
But painful things don't disappear because we ignore them. They just wait. He hesitated. Then he added, "And speaking of waiting, there's something I need to tell you both." My heart squeezed. "This is about the issue of safety, isn't it?" Melissa asked nervously. Walter shook his head. "No, you and your family are not in danger, but the truth is," he exhaled, "every year I receive a reminder." "Reminder?" Daniel asked. "A letter," Walter said. "Always unsigned, always the same message." He stood, went to his study, and returned with a folded, aged envelope. He placed it on the table. Melissa reached for it with shaking fingers and read aloud, "For those you saved, we remember. For her, we see you. Live your life." Melissa froze. Daniel swallowed hard. I felt tears sting my eyes. Walter sat back down. "I never knew who sent them. Survivors from Gardesh, perhaps? Families of those I helped? But every year the message is the same." Daniel was stunned. "They're thanking you." "Or reminding me not to hide," Walter murmured. "And until your mother, I didn't know what to do with that." He looked at me with quiet intensity. "But now I do." The room held its breath. Melissa whispered, "And what is that?" Walter smiled. "Not sad, not guarded, but full. I want to live the years I have left openly, fully, with love, with truth, with Eleanor." My chest tightened. Daniel looked at me, then at Walter, and something softened in his eyes. Finally, completely. "Then," Daniel said quietly, "you have our blessing." Walter closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing the words with fragile gratitude. But blessings can't erase the past, and as dessert melted untouched on our plates, I sensed, deep in my bones, that Walter's past had one more revelation waiting, one that none of us were prepared for. The following week felt strangely peaceful, like the quiet after a storm when everyone's still bracing for aftershocks, even though the sky is already clearing. Daniel was warmer. Melissa was gentler. Walter was lighter. Our little world, once fractured and tense, had begun to weave itself back together. But peace often comes right before truth changes everything. It started with a knock on my door. Not Walter's gentle 3-tap pattern, not Daniel's hurried tapping. This knock was firm, authoritative. I opened the door to find a woman in her late 40s, dressed in an immaculate navy suit, standing straight-backed with an air of someone who had long ago stopped being intimidated by anything. "Mrs. Holloway?" she asked. "Yes." She offered a small but respectful smile. "My name is Agent Mara Keene. I'm with the Department of Defense." My stomach dropped. "Is this about Walter?" Her expression shifted, something between regret and duty. "I need to speak with both of you. It's important." Fear curled through me like smoke. "Is he in danger?" I whispered. "No," she said quickly, "not in danger, but there are matters he deserves to know, matters he was never told." Her tone gave me chills. "Please," I said, "come in. Walter is at home. Let me call him." 15 minutes later, Walter arrived. His face was composed, but I could see the tension and the stiffness of his shoulders. He greeted Agent Keene with polite caution. "Agent," he said, "I suspected this day might come eventually." She shook his hand with a respect I couldn't fully decipher. "I imagine so, Colonel." He winced. "I'm not a colonel anymore." Perhaps not in title, but in legacy, very much so. Walter sighed and sat beside me. His hand brushed mine beneath the table, seeking grounding or giving it, I wasn't sure. Agent Keene placed a thick, sealed envelope on the table. Its edges were frayed with age, its seal slightly yellowed. "This," she said, "was classified for 38 years. 2 weeks ago, after a routine archival review, it was flagged for release. By law, it must be delivered to you." Walter stared at it, expression unreadable. "What is it?" he asked. "It's the final report regarding the Gardesh civilians you tried to save," she said quietly. "It contains information your superiors chose not to share at the time." Walter's breath hitched. I grabbed his hand. Sir, she continued gently, I know you've carried tremendous guilt for not saving everyone, for believing your interference cost lives. You deserve to know the truth. His voice was barely audible. And what truth is that? She slid the envelope toward him. Open it. Walter's hands shook, only slightly but enough that I felt it. He broke the brittle seal and unfolded the contents. He read silently. I watched his eyes move, line by line, until they stopped. His jaw clenched, then trembled. Walter? I whispered. He didn't answer. Agent Keene spoke, her voice softer now. The civilians who didn't make it, they were already gone before you reached them. The intelligence was wrong. The timeline was wrong. You didn't fail them. Walter shut his eyes tightly, pain and relief fighting for dominance. You saved every living person who was still there, and that rescue, it went uncredited because acknowledging it would have revealed intel errors the military wasn't ready to admit. Walter gripped the paper as though it might vanish. All these years I thought You didn't lose them, Agent Keene said firmly. You saved 22 lives. Your actions prevented an international disaster. You were never the villain they implied. You were the hero they weren't ready to acknowledge. Walter bowed his head, breath breaking. For decades he had lived with the belief that he had failed, that he had disobeyed for nothing, that he had lost lives he might have saved. Now the truth unraveled everything. His shoulders shook once, a single quiet sob he refused to release fully. I moved closer and wrapped an arm around him. He leaned into me, not weakly, but in profound relief. When he finally raised his head, his eyes were glassy. Why now? He asked. Agent Keene sighed. Because someone finally fought to reopen the case. A survivor, one of the children you rescued. She grew up, became a lawyer, petitioned for the declassification. Walter blinked. A child? Yes, she said with a small smile. Her name is Amara Aziz. She says you saved her life. She insisted you deserved to know the truth. Walter stared down at the report again, his voice cracking. I remember her. The girl with the blue scarf. I thought you might, Agent Keene said with a small smile. Then she placed a second item on the table, a small photograph. A girl, maybe 7, wrapped in a bright blue scarf, clinging to Walter's neck as he carried her through rubble. My breath caught. Tears spilled silently down Walter's cheeks. She sent this, she said, along with a message. She pulled out a folded card and handed it to him. Walter opened it. His lips trembled. I leaned close to read. You saved me. You saved my mother. You saved 20 others. You did not fail. Live without guilt, Colonel. Live with love. Amara. Walter pressed the card to his chest, shoulders shaking again. Agent Keene stood. I'll leave you both. If you need anything, call me. She hesitated, then added, and thank you for what you did. The world doesn't know, but some of us do. When she left, the house fell into a deep, aching silence. Walter sat there staring at the photo, at the report, at the card, like a man staring at his own ghosts finally turning into light. Eleanor, he whispered, voice raw, I didn't fail them. I didn't fail her. I held his face between my hands. No, you never did. For the first time since I'd met him, the weight behind his eyes, the invisible burden, lifted. A man who had lived half a life in shadows finally stepped into the sun. But peace doesn't erase the past, and the past wasn't done with us yet. Because as Walter reached for me, steady but shaken, the doorbell rang again. Soft, but unmistakably urgent. We exchanged a look, and I had the sudden chilling feeling. This truth wasn't the final one. Not yet.
The second knock wasn't loud. It wasn't intimidating. It wasn't even impatient. It simply was quiet, steady, purposeful. but somehow it struck a deeper chord of urgency than the agent's visit had. Walter wiped his eyes, collected himself, and rose to answer the door. I followed him, my heart thudding in my chest. He opened it. A woman stood on the porch, dark hair streaked lightly with gray, pulled back into a simple scarf, steady eyes, sharp, intelligent, face older but familiar in a way that pulled the air from the room. Walter inhaled sharply. "Amara?" he whispered. The woman smiled, softly, knowingly. "Hello, Colonel." I froze. The girl with the blue scarf, grown now, standing in our doorway. Walter's voice cracked. My God, you're alive. Of course you're alive, but..." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Walter stiffened, stunned, then melted into the embrace. Tears shimmered as he held her, like a man holding a miracle he'd long convinced himself didn't exist. When they pulled apart, Amara looked at me. "You must be Eleanor," she said warmly. "Yes," I murmured. "It's an honor to meet you." "And you," she said, her voice gentle, "are the first person I've ever seen bring the Colonel peace." Walter cleared his throat. "Come inside, please. This is unexpected." She stepped in, glancing around as if absorbing every detail of the life he'd built. "I'm sorry to arrive without warning," Amara said, "but I needed to see you in person. I needed to finish what I started." Walter frowned. "Finish?" Amara nodded. "For years, I tried to find a way to reach you. The letters were all I could manage without reopening old wounds. But once your file was released, I knew I had to come." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden box. The sight of it made Walter inhale sharply. "I recognize that," he whispered. "I hoped you would," Amara said. She handed it to him. His fingers trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside was a blue scarf. Worn, faded, but intact. He swallowed hard. "I thought this was lost." "My mother kept it," Amara said softly. "She told me that if we ever found the man who carried me through the fire, we must give it back to him." Walter bowed his head, emotion overwhelming him. When he spoke, his voice shook. This scarf was the last thing Lila ever fastened around a child's shoulders." Amara nodded. "My mother told me. She remembered your tears." Walter closed the box with reverence. "I don't deserve this." "Yes," Amara said firmly. "You do." She sat across from him, folding her hands. "There is something else you don't know, something I came to tell you face to face." Walter nodded, bracing himself. "When the extraction team reached us after your rescue, they told my mother you hadn't made it out. They said you died buying us time." Walter recoiled slightly. "They told me I died?" "Yes," she said quietly. "We mourned you. My mother lit a candle for you every year." The room thickened with grief. Grief decades old, yet fresh, raw. "I didn't learn you were alive until I became an attorney and accessed the archives. And when I realized the truth, that you were discredited, not dead, I knew I had to set it right." Walter stared at her, stunned. "All these years, you thought I was gone." She smiled through her tears. "Yet here you are, living, loving, healing." Walter exhaled shakily. "If I had known..." "You didn't need to know," she interrupted gently. "You saved us. That was enough." Silence wrapped around us like a soft blanket. Then she turned to me. "I came today," she said, "to tell you something important." I blinked. "Me?" She nodded. "Walter saved 22 lives that day, but do you know what he did afterward?" I shook my head. "He stayed to help bury the ones he couldn't save. He stayed until the last stone was laid, until the last name was spoken. And then he disappeared, not out of shame, but out of humility." Walter clenched his jaw, emotion raw and unguarded. He never wanted recognition. He wanted peace. And I believe you are the first person who has given him that. I swallowed hard, tears burning my eyes. Walter reached for my hand under the table. Amara smiled. "I came today," she said, "to tell you something important." I blinked. "Me?" She nodded.
Walter saved 22 lives that day, but do you know what he did afterward? I shook my head. He stayed to help bury the ones he couldn't save. He stayed until the last stone was laid, until the last name was spoken. And then he disappeared, not out of shame, but out of humility. Walter clenched his jaw, emotion raw and unguarded. He never wanted recognition. He wanted peace. And I believe you are the first person who has given him that. I swallowed hard, tears burning my eyes. Walter reached for my hand under the table. Amara smiled. I came today, she said, to tell you something important. I blinked. Me? She nodded. Walter saved 22 lives that day, but do you know what he did afterward? I shook my head. He stayed to help bury the ones he couldn't save. He stayed until the last stone was laid, until the last name was spoken. And then he disappeared, not out of shame, but out of humility. Walter clenched his jaw, emotion raw and unguarded. He never wanted recognition. He wanted peace. And I believe you are the first person who has given him that. I swallowed hard, tears burning my eyes. Walter reached for my hand under the table. Amara smiled. I came today, she said, to tell you something important. I blinked. Me? She nodded. Walter saved 22 lives that day, but do you know what he did afterward? I shook my head. He stayed to help bury the ones he couldn't save. He stayed until the last stone was laid, until the last name was spoken. And then he disappeared, not out of shame, but out of humility. Walter clenched his jaw, emotion raw and unguarded. He never wanted recognition. He wanted peace. And I believe you are the first person who has given him that. I swallowed hard, tears burning my eyes. Walter reached for my hand under the table. Amara smiled. I came today, she said, to tell you something important. I blinked. Me? She nodded. Walter saved 22 lives that day, but do you know what he did afterward? I shook my head. He stayed to help bury the ones he couldn't save. He stayed until the last stone was laid, until the last name was spoken. And then he disappeared, not out of shame, but out of humility. Walter clenched his jaw, emotion raw and unguarded. He never wanted recognition. He wanted peace. And I believe you are the first person who has given him that. I swallowed hard, tears burning my eyes. Walter reached for my hand under the table. Amara smiled. I came today, she said, to tell you something important. I blinked. Me? She nodded. Walter saved 22 lives that day, but do you know what he did afterward? I shook my head. He stayed to help bury the ones he couldn't save. He stayed until the last stone was laid, until the last name was spoken. And then he disappeared, not out of shame, but out of humility. Walter clenched his jaw, emotion raw and unguarded. He never wanted recognition. He wanted peace. And I believe you are the first person who has given him that. I swallowed hard, tears burning my eyes. Walter reached for my hand under the table. Amara smiled. I came today, she said, to tell you something important. I blinked. Me? She nodded. Walter saved 22 lives that day, but do you know what he did afterward? I shook my head. He stayed to help bury the ones he couldn't save. He stayed until the last stone was laid, until the last name was spoken. And then he disappeared, not out of shame, but out of humility. Walter clenched his jaw, emotion raw and unguarded. He never wanted recognition. He wanted peace. And I believe you are the first person who has given him that. I swallowed hard, tears burning my eyes. Walter reached for my hand under the table. Amara smiled. I came today, she said, to tell you something important. I blinked. Me? She nodded. Walter saved 22 lives that day, but do you know what he did afterward? I shook my head. He stayed to help bury the ones he couldn't save. He stayed until the last stone was laid, until the last name was spoken. And then he disappeared, not out of shame, but out of humility. Walter clenched his jaw, emotion raw and unguarded. He never wanted recognition. He wanted peace. And I believe you are the first person who has given him that. I swallowed hard, tears burning my eyes. Walter reached for my hand under the table. Amara smiled. I came today, she said, to tell you something important. I blinked. Me? She nodded. Walter saved 22 lives that day, but do you know what he did afterward? I shook my head. He stayed to help bury the ones he couldn't save. He stayed until the last stone was laid, until the last name was spoken. And then he disappeared, not out of shame, but out of humility. Walter clenched his